Welcome back to season 2 of the Live Full podcast, where we talk about all things faith, family, and living fully the life God wants for you. I am so thrilled that we made it to another season of conversations, and I'm so thankful for all your support, your likes, and your listens. Well, this coming season, we have a lot of fun guests lined up for you, so I'm really excited to introduce them to you as we go through this season. But on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the power of personal leadership. And today I have my absolute favorite guest with me, and that's none other than my husband, Chris. Hey, welcome back.
Hi, babe. It's good to be back to season two.
Yeah.
It's been really fun hearing kind of everything that people have said about season one. All the people who responded to the conversations, people who were blessed, encouraged. I've listened to every single one of them,
Thank you.
and I really, really enjoyed them. So it's good that we get to do another season of this.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Well, you
Yeah.
can see we've made some upgrades too.
Uh-huh.
We've now got boom arms, which I'm so happy about.
Yeah.
Help us to let the conversation flow a bit
It's
better.
great. My hands are free. I don't have to hold any mics now.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but for real, I think there's been so many good conversations that have come out of our conversations.
Yeah.
Just people have been thinking about, I think, the things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
And I'm just blessed that I get to do this. And
Yeah.
I'm excited that we get to do another season.
I'm
Hopefully
thrilled.
more.
I'm thrilled.
And each time we'll make it even better.
Yeah, we're doing this off of a couple of crazy weeks.
Yeah.
We just flew back in from the US yesterday.
Yesterday?
So if we fall asleep during this conversation, it's
Oh.
the jet lag.
Hopefully not.
Hopefully not. Hopefully you don't fall asleep. And it was but a great time at school vacation now.
Yeah.
So lots of time with the kids, with the family. And I'm glad we get to do this again.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
Mhm.
Well, let's start with this. I think in the last season, we talked a bit about your journey to becoming a pastor,
Mhm.
right? And just how you've left, like, your work in the civil service, and then
Yep.
you came out and became a pastor. But I thought maybe we'll start this season with you sharing a bit about how you came to know Jesus, or what that journey was like for you.
Yeah. Well, if you go all the way back, my parents were not believers. I mean, they only came to know Jesus probably in their 30s. It's a cool story how it happened. They were followers of some Indian cult, I think, at that time. But they had a live-in helper at that time, which was common in Singapore for some families. She was a Christian, and she's the one who actually invited people to our house to come and minister to my parents. And through that, they came to faith. They were invited to church, came to faith. If I'm not wrong, that was actually the year I was born. And so I basically like grew up in the church. My dad used to write like the significant dates in my Bible. And so I think I first received Jesus into my heart when I was like 5 or 6 years old,
Wow.
in Sunday school. And so that was cool. But there are a couple of like moments that were really, really significant, like for me. One was, I think I was maybe 13 or 14, and I was at a youth camp or conference or something like that. And I remember being filled with the Spirit
Wow.
at that camp, and it was a profound experience. I think that was one that was really significant. And another was when I was 18. I'd always been in church. I knew who God was. I had a relationship with Him. But I was 18. We were at what we called the encounter
Yeah.
at the time. And I remember a
Retreat,
session. Yeah, it was like a 2 or 3 day retreat. Lots of teaching, ministry. And I remember being, at an altar call, responding to God. And I think it was about repentance or forgiveness. And we were being taught about the parable of the prodigal son. And I remember in that moment just having such a revelation of the love of God. In a way that wasn't just in my head.
Yeah.
I knew about the love of God, but I think He really touched me in a deep and a really profound way. And I point to that moment as changing the trajectory of my walk with God and my life like forever. I think that was a point where I began to pray, God, give me a heart for people. And that was really what launched me into a much deeper relationship with God, even into ministry and into leadership. And I've never looked back since. I studied,
Keep growing and
yeah, growing, learning, leading. I went to college in the US. And I think that was a season where, I kind of knew God then in my heart, but it almost like God was like, man, training my head now.
yeah.
Because the environment was pretty opposed to the gospel, pretty opposed to Christianity. And I had to reconcile kind of what I experienced and what I knew in my heart with a with a faith that I could explain to others or I could get behind, that it is not just some ritualistic pie in the sky kind of faith. No, I mean, I think it's a defensible faith. I could put words to what I believed in. So that season two was like pretty significant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that you brought that up
Yep.
because this is exactly what we're talking about today,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're
Yeah.
talking about personal leadership
Yep.
and just, I think some people they start well, and this is coming off our last season's last episode too.
Yeah.
A lot of people start well, but it's hard to finish well.
Right.
And as I was thinking about that a bit more, I think one of the key things
Mm.
is actually, can you lead yourself?
Yep.
Are you able to figure out when, you need to maybe push yourself in this direction a bit more,
Yeah.
or recognize that the surroundings around you will not affect you and
Yep.
say, okay, I'm going to lead myself, not let the surroundings or the circumstances lead me,
Good.
you know?
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying, especially in your time in the US, is the surroundings or the circumstances were a certain way,
Yep.
but you chose to make decisions in another way. And so I thought we'll talk
Sure.
about that a little bit
Yeah.
because I feel like that skill of saying, or that art of leading yourself,
Mm.
is crucial to any believer who
Yep.
wants to grow.
Yep.
And any believer who says, okay, you know what, I'm starting here, and this could be like where you are at 5, 6, right?
Right.
But how do I finish? You're
Yeah.
now like 40, right?
Yep.
And so in those years, actually, are you growing? Are you
Mm.
leading yourself too? And
Mm.
and then when I talk about it, I don't mean it like being very independent,
Yeah.
and I just want to make decisions and figure out my own way whenever I want to, however I want to, outside the will of God. That's not
Mm-hmm.
what I mean by
Mm-hmm.
talking about personal leadership.
Yep.
I'm talking a bit more about stewarding the life that we have,
Good.
developing ourselves personally and our character in order to lead a godly life.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the kind of personal leadership we're
Good.
talking about
Yep.
today. Yeah, and I think about a verse too in the Bible. If I just use that to like frame our time a bit,
Sure.
this is actually written about David, right? In First Samuel chapter 30, verse 6, it says David was now in great danger because his men were very bitter
Mm.
about losing their sons and daughters,
Mm.
and they began to talk of stoning him. So they were upset with him, right, for making certain decisions.
Yep.
But this is the part that I underline, okay? And if you guys are listening, you can do that too. It says, but David found strength in the Lord his God.
Mm.
And that to me kind of epitomizes personal leadership
Mm.
because the circumstances were a certain way,
Mm.
right? He was probably feeling a certain way too,
Yep.
discouraged, upset. But he said he was going to find strength or
Mm.
strengthen himself
Mm.
in the Lord.
Yeah.
Not wait for a Sunday service to strengthen himself,
Yep.
even though that's very good and everyone should be there. Not wait for a leader to come to you and ask you, how are you? And hopefully they give you some good advice about what you can do in your life,
Yeah.
right? But it was almost like a personal ownership
Mm-hmm.
of your, of where you are in life,
Mm-hmm.
and saying, okay, I need to take charge now
Yep.
and figure out what I need to do so that I can move forward in this life and be, more godly
Yeah.
in the
Good.
decisions I made. And so I think about that, right? How important is personal leadership or leading yourself in your own life?
Oh, I mean, it's vitally important.
Mm.
For anyone who wants to be a leader, before you lead others, you better lead yourself. And I always have this picture of a pyramid, like in my mind. You can build a pyramid as high as you want it to go.
Mm.
The only factor is how wide your base is.
Mm.
And I think that's the way it is with life and with leadership. The better you're able to lead yourself, the wider of a foundation that you establish, actually, the higher the things that you can build on that foundation. Right? If you can lead yourself well, you increase your capacity, you increase the stability that you have in your life.
Yep. Good.
And then on top of that, God can build anything. God can build your family, God can build your marriage, God can build your ministry, He can build your work, He can build your influence and your impact. If your base is strong. And I think that represents what it means to lead yourself well. And the converse is true if you've got a narrow base. The pyramids aren't built upside down with a narrow base and then trying to build things on it.
Yep.
And I think a lot of times that's what people experience. Man, I'm growing in influence, I'm growing in opportunities, but man, I don't have a foundation
That's
that
good.
represents self leadership to deal with the weight of what comes, to deal with the opposition, to deal with the extra demands. You know, how do you manage your family when life gets crazy? And I think all of that has to do with like your ability to lead yourself. Do you have, do you know yourself like
Mm.
well enough? Do you have disciplines and rhythms to help you to live your life well? So I think it's vitally important. And anyone who wants to go any distance at all in leadership, I think needs to start with knowing who they are and managing themselves well.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe what we can do is this. Would you share some of the things that maybe has helped you? Now, obviously,
Yeah.
we are not expert,
Nope.
right?
Yeah.
We've lived some part of life. There's
Mm.
much more to go, and there's much more for us to grow in and learn.
Yeah.
But what has helped you so far?
Yeah.
What are some things you've seen in your own life that you've done
Mm.
that has helped you to effectively lead yourself?
Yeah. I think leading yourself begins with knowing yourself. And most of the time, if you're not self aware or if you don't know who you are, then it becomes hard to lead yourself well. So I think there's a few dimensions to it. One is um, who's God called you to be? Like what is that sphere that He's called you to? What is the call of God on your life? Uh, I think we need to find clarity in that.
Yeah.
If not, actually, you're getting swayed to and fro by what people expect of you, what people want you to do, what the world says you should be. You end up chasing the things that people say you should chase if you're not clear about who you are and what God's called you to
Yeah.
be or do. And I think that's the first step actually in self leadership, just to be aware and commit that to prayer. God, like in this season, and it might change season to season. God, what are you calling me to do? And having that kind of focus,
Mm.
I think is a big part of it because
Yeah.
a lot of self leadership is saying no to the things that you should say no to,
Yeah.
so that you can say yes to the things that you need to say yes to.
Good.
So I think that level of like self awareness, but also in a smaller sense of like knowing your strengths and your weaknesses, what you're great at, and what are some red flags like in your life.
Yeah.
I think some of that comes with time and with I think being open to others who can point things out like
Yep.
in you. Recently we did these Enneagram personality tests, right?
Yes.
Now, I'm not like a evangelist, all right, for the Enneagram.
Enneagrams.
I'll leave that to one of my pastors. You know, but that was helpful
Yeah.
even to know like, hey, what are um in terms of my personality, what am I predisposed to?
Mm.
you know and okay, well, I think my personality is more this way, and so I'm an Enneagram 3, which is kind of achievement oriented, and so I'm driven.
Yeah.
When I know what I need to do, man, I'll go all out for it. But the flip side to it is you might overlook some of the relational aspects of
Mm.
things because you're just going for the goal,
Yeah.
right? The flip side of it is you're a little like oversensitive to what people might say about you,
Yeah.
because what if they don't think of me as an achiever or someone who does well? None of this is like good or bad, but I think having that awareness, then I can lead myself. And I just need to be aware, okay, hey, look, I think in this moment you're being a little too concerned just about, man, are people going to think well of me? Work on that, put that aside. And I think it gives you awareness of what you need to work on.
Mm.
And as I work on those things, actually I grow.
Yeah.
As I know like what I'm good at, right? And I leverage those things a bit more,
Yeah.
okay, I grow and I make a bigger and bigger impact. So I think knowing yourself is probably the first step, like
Yeah,
through
if I
that.
can just add to that point
Yeah.
too, I think by doing a test like that, actually what you're saying to yourself is, my own perspective of who I am is maybe not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
I might have some awareness of who I am, but I feel like maybe I need another perspective.
Yeah.
I need someone, something, another test, or someone even,
Yeah.
like you're talking about, maybe a mentor or something,
Yeah.
um, to come in and give me a different perspective because
Mm.
I might have blind spots,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And if I have blind spots, I the definition of that is I can't see these things, right? And
Yep.
so I need another perspective, but I think that requires a bit of humility.
Oh, absolutely. I think when you reach the point where you're like, I think I'm good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the end of growing.
Yes.
That's the end of kind of leading yourself, because there's always like things in your life that you're going to have to be working on. And once you feel like I think I'm good now. You've probably settled a little too much into a status quo,
Mm,
and there isn't anything to like push on or lead yourself into. I think probably a good litmus test of whether you're leading yourself well is there some discomfort in your life?
mm,
If you're just comfortable, you're probably not leading yourself.
yeah.
Because there's always something that I'm like, God, this thing, I'm not happy with it. I want to push it a
Grow.
little
Yeah.
further. Man, this bit, Gladys always tells me, hey, why you always said that? Okay, God, I need to work on this thing, you know? And so I think having humility to
Yeah.
receive that, and even like processing that. I mean, we've talked about this, right? Even with something as simple as the personality like test. I'm a
Mm,
3, you're apparently like a 6. And, it's like, well, the red flag, in that is okay, such and such a thing. Hey, sometimes we call that out, like in each other's lives. Sometimes we laugh about it, but in that way we help to like lead each other along and grow in
yeah.
that sense.
I mean, I don't enjoy being labeled by it.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what I like about it, but it does give me a deeper understanding of maybe some of my
Mhm.
fears, what triggers me,
Yeah.
what causes me to react a certain way, or why do I make decisions as such,
Mhm.
so that really helped. I mean, even in our marriage, but
Yeah.
that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah.
But I like that it gives a lot of like personal awareness, a lot of, I think, even self-discovery,
Mm.
you know we change, right? Because when you're young, you're a certain way,
Yeah.
you're a certain personality. I remember taking personality tests when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
I was completely different
Yeah.
from who I am today.
Right.
And because we are constantly changing, our
Mm.
environments are constantly changing. Actually, we are changing too.
Yeah.
So this process of self-awareness and self-discovery actually is a constant process
Yeah. All the time.
that you walk through, you take all the time in order to figure out this personal leadership thing. Because in order to know yourself,
Yes.
in order to lead yourself, actually got to know yourself,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah.
that's the first thing that you were saying.
Yeah.
What else do you do?
I think well, maybe I'll just add on to that point
Yeah.
too. Actually, the way you lead yourself has to evolve through different seasons of life.
Mm.
The way or the demands or what is needed for you to lead yourself when you're a teen or you're a student is totally different from when you're a married person.
Yeah.
To when you've got kids.
Mm.
Like till you get older. So I think like having that, I think adaptability and that ability to flex. You're always thinking like, okay, God, in this season, like, what do I need to
Yeah.
lead in? Like, what am I pushing on? I think that's so crucial. One of the things that I found has been increasingly important for me is having like disciplines and rhythms in my life. You
Yeah.
know, that help me. That verse you mentioned, like David strengthened himself in the Lord. And I think to think about what are the things that strengthen me, because there are a lot of things that require my strength,
Mm.
right? My work requires my strength. My ministry requires my strength. My children requires my strength. All these things take from me, and not in a bad way. I want to invest in those things, but man, I need to strengthen myself.
Yeah.
And what are some of those things that help me build capacity,
Yeah.
help me build
Good.
strength, so that I can do all of those things. Um, so some examples, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like just in my walk with God, like what is that rhythm? Do I have a discipline? And this is, basic level, like almost cliche. But man, daily, am I in His Word?
Mm.
Daily, do I have some time in my day where I just quieten down because life gets crazy and I'm just waiting on the Lord, and I'm hearing from Him?
Yeah.
And so I actually have this is I've got an app,
Mm.
and every day it generates a new page for me, and the top of that page, and it's something that I fill out and I work on every day. The top of that page is basically like my devotional time,
Yeah.
and it basically says this. It starts with scripture, and so I'll write something about scripture.
Yeah.
There's something about what is God speaking to you today, and it's not a long thing, but I always write what is that one thing that I feel God speaking to me today about. And then there's something about prayer. What is one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I'm believing God for today? Doesn't take me a long time. It could be 20, 30 minutes, like at the start of my day, but I'm always filling that in. And I know, like, daily, I just need that discipline. I
Yeah.
just need that. Why? Because it strengthens me,
Yeah.
it strengthens my spirit, right? It gets me
Mm-hmm.
ready. So that's just like one example, I think, of a discipline and rhythm to like gain strength and build myself so that, I can expand the base of that pyramid
Yeah.
and do all the other things that God's called me to do.
I think one of the things that people ask you often is, how do you manage everything?
Mm.
Because obviously, one facet of life, and we talked about this a little bit in season one, too. One facet of life is your ministry, another facet is your work, there's family, but there are other things too, right? You have personal interest.
Yep.
You enjoy exercising,
Yeah.
and
No.
how do you kind of fit all of those things into?
Yeah. Um. Wow. I think that same idea, like, how do you strengthen yourself?
Mm,
Uh, and over time, I think when I was younger, I used to be like, man, I just need to hustle. I
mm,
need to work harder. And look, work hard. We should work hard. Don't be lazy. Give your all. Go overtime if you need to. But I found that the way I can run harder is when I strengthen myself like a little more. So, I talked about spiritually investing in that time so that spiritually I find strength. Uh, but, even things like um, physically, like how do I
yeah,
strengthen myself? So, exercise. Uh, exercise makes me feel great. And so in the last, like, I've always exercised. I'll go for runs, like short runs. But in the last like year or so, like I've really tried to invest more time even going to the gym,
good.
like and literally like getting stronger. Because as you get older, your body gets weaker. But I want to go the distance, and I found that exercise really energizes me. It
Mm,
really gets my energy level up. Post exercise, I feel like I'm twice as productive
yeah.
as I am before. So like invest in that. Why? I'm not a gym rat. I'm not a fitness freak, but I'm strengthening myself so that I can do like more and more of those things.
Yeah, and that's a great example of personal leadership because it's hard to find time. I think the greatest excuse for exercise, for example,
Yeah.
is I don't have time to do it,
Yep.
right? But personal leadership is saying I need it. And so how do I fit it into my schedule and make sure that's part of the schedule, the rhythms of my day?
Yeah.
Because I think about even for myself, I think there was a season where I really felt like, okay, sometimes you're how do I explain this? Like sometimes you feel like you are in the slums or the dumps,
Yep.
you know?
Oh yeah.
And actually what exercise does for you is it gives you like endorphins, like
Uh,
just, in your body.
yep.
And that gives you almost like a rush
Yes.
to be able to like take on your day. Now, obviously that's a quite a temporary measure,
Yeah.
but those things help you, or at least it's a measure to kind of like lead yourself and say, hey, look, like I don't feel like it right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to find time. But by doing so,
Yes.
actually, I'm adding like a new measure in my day or new strength
Oh
in
yeah.
my day
Yeah.
in order for me to run harder,
Yeah.
run further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always thought of it, and there are many other things as multipliers actually.
Mm,
That the 30 minutes or 45 minutes that I invest in that, and it requires discipline, becomes a multiplier for the rest of my day.
yeah.
And sometimes we think of the disciplines as like, oh my gosh, it's such a chore.
Mm,
Like, oh my gosh, it's just like another weight or responsibility that I need to take on. But it's actually not that. It requires discipline,
yeah.
it requires planning, but the investment I make in that is actually a big boost to me, like, in the rest of my day or the rest of my life. Another thing is, I think the discipline of like clarity and focus,
Mm,
I think, and that is like self leadership too, to not just get like sucked in
yeah.
to all the activity
True.
and the busyness and the humdrum like of life. Another one of those things that I do in the mornings, uh, apart from kind of my devotional time, actually I plan my day out. I'm like, hey, what are the three big things I need to do today?
Yeah.
Right? And there's a bunch of other stuff, but these are the three big things I need to settle today. And just that 10 or 15 minutes, like, gives me clarity and focus for what I need to accomplish. I do that at the start of a week too. And what is that? Like, yeah, I will get busy. There's a lot I need to do, but I need to invest in like, man, leading myself and saying these are the things that are important.
Yeah.
This week or this day, don't lose sight of them.
Yep.
And just have the discipline to not get sidetracked or not get distracted by anything, but be like, okay, these are the important things. And so and even that whole exercise of every morning having that, I mean, that is leading myself. Most mornings I wake up, I'm like, dude, I've got a million things that I want to
Yeah.
jump into, I need to do, but no, like, just start with that, set that time aside, and I think that is like part of like leading yourself.
Yeah,
Mm.
good. I think at the beginning I talked about how personal leadership is not saying I just do whatever I want when I feel like it,
Mm.
right? Go where your heart leads, right? And that's outside of like God's will.
Yeah.
And I talked about how it really is saying, okay, God, like how do I steward my time, my maybe my finances, my energies, my
Yeah.
strength, right, in a way that is pleasing to God.
Good. Yeah.
Um, what do you think about the involvement of our leaders, our church, and all that too?
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Self leadership's not just like, hey, you do you,
Yeah, it's not done alone,
you
right?
know. Um, I think of a season maybe 2 years ago, when things were heavy, like we were busy, and I made some decisions that I shouldn't have made. We talked about it, shared it with you, and it was very clear to me at that point that I need to talk to like a good friend of mine.
Mm,
I need to talk to my pastor,
mm,
and it wasn't easy, I think, to have that conversation.
yeah,
Um, but one, I knew I had to do it,
yeah,
and two, I told you I was going to do it.
yep,
So that was kind of like, I mean, leading myself, I guess, in a way, because I realized um I needed to submit myself, to people who I knew like cared for me, who God had placed above me, like in my life, uh, and just have that humility, and that brokenness to be like, hey, like I'm going through this. I experienced this.
yep,
Like, even if you don't have any advice or help for me, I'm not looking for anything from you. But like, even that act of like, I want to share this with you. I want to be
yes,
accountable to you. That in itself, I think, was a big step of growth, for me. And obviously, they were incredibly supportive. Gave me some like great advice. And looking back now, I'm over those things. But looking back now, that helped me to like grow,
yeah,
um and just the fact of being able to bring that out into the open and share with it, like, helped me to overcome those things,
yeah,
like, well. So I think, yeah, having humility, and just to recognize that, like, you can't do it on your own. You really shouldn't do it on your own. God's
yeah,
placed you in community. He's placed leaders like over you, to help you in those things.
mm,
So I think that's a really critical, like,
yeah.
critical
I think good self leadership involves recognizing that you have gifts,
mm,
but you also have weaknesses.
mm,
Because I think for most people who are unable to lead themselves well,
yeah,
they skew one side too much, and
yes,
it could be either way, right? It could be, I think of myself like as such a terrible person.
mm,
I'm so bad at everything, so therefore I can do nothing,
yeah,
right? And you are almost crippled by that fact.
yeah.
And if you never recognize that, oh, actually, I have gifts, then you can never do anything else.
Yep.
Because so that's part of like, I think, good self leadership, being able to see the spectrum of,
Mm.
I have got good, right? I've
Yes.
got gifts.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the other spectrum is you only think of yourself so well.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't have any areas to grow,
Yeah.
and therefore actually no one needs to help me.
Yeah.
I'm on my own. I
Yeah.
can do everything that I want to. Every decision I make must be a good one, you
Yes.
know and so having that balance, I think, is important.
Mm.
And therefore, bring in that same points again, right? Whether you have a leader who can kind of speak that into your life,
Yep.
or maybe even one of these like tests, or someone else can tell you. And I think about this thing about taking feedback,
Hmm.
because I think that is one quite tricky area,
Yeah.
when you're trying to grow, right? But if you skew like either ends of the spectrum, you think
Yeah.
you're so amazing or you think you're so terrible, actually the way you take feedback will be affected by that.
Mm.
So maybe you can tell us, like, how would you do that? How would you respond?
Yeah. I think the bit about feedback that requires you to lead yourself well, is first recognizing what goes on internally when
Mm,
feedback comes. So I don't think I'm unique in this. When I get a piece of feedback that's not great,
yeah,
right? I think there's a few natural responses that come. One, I'm defensive.
yeah.
Two, I'm offended. Three, I'm discouraged.
Mm,
And none of these are helpful responses. But how do I lead myself? I do it first by recognizing those emotions when they come up,
yeah.
right? Is my first instinct to defend myself? Is my first instinct to be offended? Is it to be discouraged? And then recognizing those emotions and then choosing not to give in to them, I think actually is the first part in how you lead yourself and prepare yourself or position yourself to receive feedback.
Yeah.
Because if your first instinct is one of those three things,
Yeah.
actually the feedback gets lost,
Mm.
and I don't think you reap the full benefits of receiving that and processing that.
Mm.
Um, and so that's a process. That's a process of gaining confidence in who you are and not taking all feedback personally, I think.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
like, look, I'm confident enough in like who I am, who God's called me to do that. Maybe that feedback is for a behavior, maybe that feedback is for an action, maybe that feedback is for a competency issue, in my
Yes.
life. But it's not a feedback about my identity and like who I am in Christ, you know? And so I think like even leading yourself emotionally,
Good.
I think is so crucial in being able to receive and to process feedback in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot to do with the fruits of the spirit, or like
Yeah.
even just the idea of self control.
Oh yeah.
You know, are you able to not jump into some kind of conclusion about what people say about you? Instead, you're able to
Mm.
almost like temper your emotions and say, okay, what is that about,
Mm.
right? And do I can I go back and take that again and say, oh yeah, that was useful? Or maybe sometimes people give feedback and actually it's not.
Yeah.
You don't want it.
Yeah.
I remember when this was a lot younger, and this was an early lesson on how you take feedback in personal leadership. I remember one of my pastors sat me down, and she said, hey, like, you're great. I love you. But I noticed that there's a particular skirt that you wear to the youth service
Mm.
that is a little short.
Mm.
I think you shouldn't wear it anymore. And okay, to be honest, exactly what you said.
Yep.
My first internal response was a
Yep.
bit defensive. I'm like, it's not that
Yeah.
short.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Or like, sometimes people take all these things very personally.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
who are you to tell me what to wear?
Yeah.
You know, I've heard of people who left church because of that,
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
and so, but I think I remember thinking in that moment, I was pretty young at that time. I felt pretty embarrassed. I think that was one of my
Mm.
first responses. So, a bit like what you're saying, discouragement, a bit of it's like a personal attack to who you are.
Yeah.
But then I realized that, wait, I don't think it's about my character.
Mm.
I think the reason why I felt embarrassed in the first place, I love that you're saying that you should be able to differentiate.
Yes.
What is the feedback about, right? And I realized, okay, it's not about my character. Like, she believes in who I am.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a bad person because I wore a short skirt,
Mm.
Nothing to do with that. It's just a decision that I made. And maybe I was not as conscious about it.
Right.
But from now onwards, I will always
Yeah.
be very conscious about the decision about my outfits. You
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm so conscious
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
But I think that was part of my journey
Yeah.
into personal leadership. Just being able to understand what kind of feedback
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not that's something like what do I do with it,
Mm.
right? Um, are you able to tell the difference when it's actually constructive versus something that you can push away? So for example, I think for some people, people love giving feedback,
Yeah. All the
right?
time. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, to our kids,
Sure.
to us,
Oh yeah.
right? All the time. But
Yeah.
maybe it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning. Do you know yourself?
Yeah. I mean, do you know yourself? So that helps you to like filter it.
Mm,
Um, and where is that coming from? Like, who's giving it?
yeah.
Look, as a pastor, as a leader, you get all kinds of feedback. You know, um, people just have opinions about everything. One of my filters is like, is this coming from someone who genuinely wants to help me or help build the ministry?
Yeah.
You know, so I think the heart of where that's coming from, like, is pretty important. I think there are some areas, especially when it comes to my kids. I mean, as a pastor, and you've got kids who are, everyone knows.
Yeah.
Uh, Everyone has some opinion.
Yeah.
This, like our kids were, around the hall one day because they feel so comfortable in church, and someone came up and said, "Hey, you shouldn't let your kids go around the hall like that." And I was like, "What's wrong?" I mean, they feel comfortable. I'd rather they feel safe and happy to like mix with other people
Yeah.
rather than like always stick around with me. So that kind of thing. I quite quickly, I know who I am. I know how I'm raising my kids, and I put that aside. But I think that filter of like, do I feel that actually this is you're actually trying to help me, or are you just trying to be like critical? Are you just trying to, complain? Are you just trying to,
Mhm.
And I'm at a point in my life where, look, I'll take everything, but I'll chew the meat, I'll spit out the bones.
Yeah.
You know, I think in every piece of feedback, there's probably like one or two things that I think that would be useful. Most things, whether it's a criticism or a compliment,
Mm.
I try not to let either thing like get to me.
Yeah.
Because if a compliment comes, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so good.
Yeah.
Then when a criticism comes, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm so
So
bad.
terrible.
Like, and so I've long learned that you hold on to any of those things pretty loosely, and I think you'll be a lot happier.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's good. I believe that everyone is on a different level or place in their own personal leadership.
yeah,
If someone is looking to start out, or maybe even, I don't know, everyone's at a differing place where they're at, right, in terms of where they're leading themselves.
yeah.
What is one thing you can say to people who are wanting to really level up in this area of personal leadership?
Good.
One thing that they can do after today's podcast.
Yeah, good. I think I thought about this when I was younger. I wanted to go fast,
Mm,
but as I get older, I want to go far.
good.
And so invest in those things that will help you go the distance. People say that you overestimate what you can do in a year,
Mm,
but you grossly underestimate what you can do in a decade
wow.
or more. And I think the journey of self leadership is not one that takes place in the matter of months or years. It happens throughout your life.
Mm,
And so those things that you choose to invest in, the habits that you choose to put in place, the disciplines that you're establishing for yourself, that process of discovering who you are, knowing your weak points, being clear about your blind spots,
mm,
and working on those things. It's a process that takes your whole life. I'm 40 this year. I believe I'm not even like halfway through my life yet. I've
yeah,
got so much further to go. So my encouragement to anyone would be, man, invest in those things that don't just give you a short-term return or
good.
immediate impact. Invest in those things that are going to bear fruit in 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years, because those are the things that will help you to go the distance.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
And thank you for kicking off our very first episode
Season 2.
of season 2.
Right, so
Wow.
good.
I know, it was so good. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that this episode has helped you to live full.